She missed the train by 40 seconds. This was not a disaster. Missing a train by 40 seconds is an annoyance. The specific, mild annoyance of watching the carriage doors close just as you arrive at the platform, and then standing there for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has calculated that hurrying was not going to be possible and has turned out to be correct. The next train was in 51 minutes. She had a ticket. She had nowhere she needed to be by a specific time. The afternoon was hers. She sat down on the platform bench. It was a small station, the kind of station that exists along the valley lines in South Wales. A single platform, a shelter with peeling paint in the National Railway colours, a single member of staff visible through the glass of a booth whose primary function seemed to be ensuring that the departure board was correct. The hills on three sides pressing close. An October sky doing what an October sky does in this part of the world, which is to contain everything, the light and the cloud and the specific quality of a Welsh autumn, without committing to any particular version of itself. The platform had 4 other people on it. A young woman in nursing scrubs with her eyes closed and her phone in her lap. The specific exhausted stillness of someone at the end of a shift. 2 teenagers with backpacks who were conducting at some volume a conversation about something she could not quite follow. The rapid shorthand of people who have been friends long enough to have developed their own vocabulary. And at the far end of the bench, not far from where she had sat, an old man. He was very old. The kind of old that has stopped being surprising and has become simply the condition of a person. The way some people carry their age so completely that it stops being the most notable thing about them and becomes simply them. He was thin, but with the compactness of someone who was thin by constitution rather than decline. A small, contained man in a good dark overcoat and a flat cap and polished shoes that suggested he had dressed with some care for this journey. A bag on his lap, canvas, dark green, the kind that would have been called a Gladstone bag in an earlier era, old and well-maintained. His hands rested on the bag. His eyes were on the track. He did not acknowledge her when she sat down. This was not rudeness. It was the self-contained quality of a person who inhabits their own company comfortably and does not require external input to feel present. He simply continued to look at the track, in the specific way of someone who has been waiting on platforms for long enough to have no anxiety about the waiting. Bonnie Tyler looked at the track too for a while. She was not someone who started conversations with strangers on the basis of proximity. She was direct, and she was warm. And she had spent 50 years in the performing arts, which meant she had spent 50 years managing the specific mathematics of who you talk to and when. The fan in the airport who wants something from you. The journalist in the green room who will write it down, the party guest who is really doing research. She had long since learned to distinguish the conversation that costs something from the one that gives something back, and she had learned to reserve her energy accordingly. But there was something about this platform, and this afternoon, and the 51 minutes stretching out in front of her in the particular October quiet of a Welsh valley, that made the calculation feel different. Or perhaps it was the shoes. The careful, specific care of polished shoes on a Tuesday afternoon at a valley train station. The statement of someone who still believed that the journey warranted the preparation, even at a considerable age, even for a trip that nobody else was likely to notice. She said, "Are you going far?" He turned and looked at her. Not with the recognition of someone working out who she was, with the straightforward look of someone being spoken to for the first time and making an initial assessment of what kind of conversation this was going to be. "Cardiff," he said. "You?" "Same," she said. A pause. Neither of them felt the need to fill it immediately, which was itself a quality worth noticing. Then he said, "I haven't been for 2 years." She waited. "My daughter," he said. And then he stopped, as though the sentence were a complete thought rather than an incomplete one. As though "my daughter" explained the whole of it, which in a way it did, because there is a specific weight to 2 words spoken by an elderly man who has not seen his daughter in 2 years on a platform in a Welsh valley on a Tuesday in October, and it does not require expansion. Bonnie Tyler did not say anything immediately. She had learned over a very long time of being in rooms with people in various states of feeling, that silence is sometimes the more generous response. She let it sit. His name was Emrys. He told her this eventually, not as an introduction but as a detail that emerged naturally once the conversation had established itself, the way names tend to emerge in conversations that are going somewhere rather than simply existing. He was 83 years old, though he told her this with the specific faint surprise of someone who has reached a number that still, even now, requires a moment to fully believe. He had lived in the valley his whole life, minus the 2 years he had spent in the merchant navy at 19 and 20, which he mentioned briefly and with the implication that they were a story of their own that was not what today was for. His wife had died 4 years ago. Her name was Gwenllian, Gwen, mostly. They had been married for 58 years. He said this the way people say very large numbers when the numbers belong to their own lives, with a kind of quiet that is not grief exactly, but is the settled version of what grief becomes after 4 years of carrying it. The weight that has integrated itself into the ordinary posture of a day. His daughter was called Sian. She was 51 years old and lived in Cardiff. She had 2 grown children of her own and a husband whom Emrys had met 4 times since the wedding. The distance between them, and he was clear that the distance was not geographical, had been growing for most of the decade, and the specific shape of it he did not describe in detail because some shapes are too specific to be rendered in general terms, and also because this was a bench on a train platform and not the kind of place where you pull out the full architecture of a family difficulty and lay it across the floor. What he said was this. After Gwen died, Sian had come, and they had sat with it together. And in the sitting together something had been said that should not have been said or not said that should have been said. Emrys was not entirely certain which it was even now, and he suspected both were true, and the distance which had been growing had hardened into something with a different quality. 2 years, he said again. And now you're going, Bonnie Tyler said. He looked at the track. Sian doesn't know. I didn't ring. I thought if I rang I'd find a reason not to go. A pause. I might still find a reason not to go. She looked at him. The flat cap, the polished shoes, the canvas bag. The 83 years of a person arranged on a platform bench, having got up that morning and put on good shoes and come to the station, she said. You've already gone. He looked at her. For a long moment, he simply looked. The same direct, assessing look he had given her at the beginning, when she had first spoken. Then something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically. The very slight shift of someone for whom a true thing has arrived from an unexpected direction. I suppose I have, he said. You've been going since you got up this morning, Bonnie Tyler said. Everything after that is just the journey. Emrys looked at the track again. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who is not listening but is listening so completely that speech is not available. Then he said, She might not let me in. She might not, Bonnie Tyler said. That's true. You're not going to tell me she will. I have no idea whether she will, she said. I don't know your daughter. He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. The ghost of a smile. The expression of someone whose cynicism about reassurance has just been, unexpectedly, respected. No, he said. No, you don't. The young woman in nursing scrubs had put her phone away and fallen properly asleep, her head against the shelter wall, her breathing slow and regular. The 2 teenagers had moved to the end of the platform and were filming something on one of their phones. The departure board showed 34 minutes. Emrys asked her what she was going to Cardiff for, and she told him. Something practical. Something that would not have made a headline. The kind of errand that fills a working life with purpose without being anything anyone else would find interesting. He nodded and asked a follow-up question, which surprised her slightly. A specific question, not a polite one. The question of someone who was actually curious rather than being conversational as a courtesy. They talked. Not about music, which he did not raise and she was glad of. Not about anything large or significant. They talked about the valley, the specific character of it that she had grown up with and he had grown up with, the damp and the closeness and the hills and the quality of a sky that you either found oppressive or came to consider the correct sky for a human being to exist under and generally came down firmly on one side or the other with no neutral ground available. He was firmly on the side of the correct sky. So was she. He asked about the changes, not in the rhetorical, elegiac way of someone performing nostalgia, but with the specific curiosity of someone who had lived in the valley his whole life and genuinely wanted to know what it looked like to someone who had come and gone. She told him what she saw when she came back, what had changed and what had not. The buildings that were different and the hills that were identical. The closing of things and the opening of other things that were not quite the same as what they replaced. He listened and occasionally confirmed or corrected, with the authority of someone who had not left and therefore knew the continuous version of the story rather than the episodic one. He talked about his working years, 30 years in the steelworks, which had been the valley's other great industry alongside coal, the industry that had given way to the same forces as the coal had given way to, leaving the same specific kind of gap that takes a generation to stop noticing. He did not speak about this with bitterness, which she had always found was the mark of a certain kind of Welsh man, the ones who had seen enough of what work was and what the absence of work was to have arrived at a position that was too clear-eyed for either nostalgia or resentment, which left only a kind of precise, accurate sadness that did not require amplification. He talked about Gwen and the way people talk about the dead when they are not performing grief. Incidentally, as a reference point, as the person whose opinion on the valley sky was the standard against which all others were measured. Gwen had not liked the valley, he said, and yet she had stayed in it for 58 years, which he had always considered the most complete proof of love he had ever been offered. She had stayed because he was there. He had always known that. He said it simply, without ceremony. The way you say things that have always been true and that you have had 4 years to make peace with not being able to tell her. The train arrived at minute 49. It came in from the north, the way the valley trains always did, appearing around the curve in the track before you could fully see it, announcing itself first as sound and then as shape and then as the full, functional reality of a thing that has arrived to take you somewhere. Emrys stood up. He adjusted the strap of his canvas bag with the careful economy of someone who has been carrying bags for 83 years. He straightened his coat. He was, Bonnie Tyler noticed, a little shorter standing than he had appeared sitting, the slight compression of great age. But the posture was good, the shoulders back, the specific dignity of a person who is going somewhere and knows it. She stood up too. "Cardiff," he said, which was not really a statement about the destination. "Cardiff," she said, which was not really a confirmation. They boarded the train at different doors because the platform distributed them that way, and she did not see him again in the carriage. The train was busy. The Valley line on a Tuesday afternoon carrying the specific mixture of people that Valley lines carry, and she found a seat and sat and looked at the hills going past the window. She thought about the shoes, the polished shoes on a Tuesday platform, the way he had said "my daughter" as though it were the whole sentence, the way he had said "you've already gone back to her," quietly, trying it out. She thought about Cian in Cardiff, who did not know that her father was on a train. She thought about Robert, about the specific unremarkable fact that she had been married to the same person for 50 years and had never had the 2-year silence, the hardened distance. The thing that could not quite be located between should have been said and should not have been said. She had been given this as a fact of her life, and she was aware, sitting on the Valley train with the October hills going past, that it was not something she could take credit for. It was simply the fortune of 2 people who had, between them, managed to keep the window open. Some people did not manage it. Some people found, late in their lives, that the window had been closed longer than they had noticed, and getting it open again required a Tuesday train journey to Cardiff and polished shoes. She hoped Cian would let him in. She did not know whether she would. She had been honest about that. But she hoped it, and the hope felt specific and real. The way you hope for things involving people you have sat next to on a platform bench for 51 minutes, and who have in that time become briefly and entirely real to you. Cardiff Central was loud in the way that large stations are loud, the specific organized chaos of a city terminus, the departures board flickering, the flow of people moving in every direction with the practiced indifference of people who pass through this space regularly. She stepped onto the platform and was immediately inside the noise and the motion of it. The Valley quiet already somewhere behind her on the train. She did not see Emrys on the platform. The train had been long and the platform was busy, and he had been at a different door. She looked for the flat cap and the dark overcoat for a moment and did not find them. She decided this was fine. The conversation had not needed a conclusion beyond itself. Some conversations are complete in the having of them, and this was one of those. She walked through the station. She did her errand. She got back on a train and went home through the valleys, the October hills going past in the reverse direction, the sky doing what it always did above them. She told Robert about the platform that evening, over dinner, in the way she sometimes told him about the small, unremarkable encounters that had turned out to be something. She told him about the shoes, and the 2 years, and you've already gone. She told him about the valley conversation, the steelworks, Gwen not liking the sky but staying anyway, the 58 years distilled into one sentence on a platform bench. He listened the way he always listened, without interruption, with the specific quality of attention that he had given her things for 50 years. When she finished, he said, "Do you think she let him in?" "I don't know," she said. "I hope so." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Me too." She looked at him across the dinner table, the kitchen behind him, the hills through the window, dark now in the October evening, the specific, ordinary, unremarkable weight of a Tuesday that had been a good Tuesday. "You'd have liked him," she said. "The shoes," Robert said. "The shoes," she agreed. It was, Bonnie Tyler thought, a good way to end a Tuesday. A missed train, a bench, an old man in polished shoes going somewhere that mattered. 51 minutes of something real on a valley platform, and then home, and dinner, and Robert hoping the same thing she hoped, which was perhaps the simplest definition of a good marriage that she had ever come across. She made a note to call her sister, not Emrys's daughter, her own people, the ones she hadn't called recently enough, the ones the window was still open with, and should stay that way. Emrys had taken 2 years to buy a train ticket. She had no intention of doing the same. Bonnie Tyler died on the 9th of July 2026. She never knew what happened when Emrys knocked on his daughter's door in Cardiff on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2023. She had never expected to know. The conversation on the platform had been complete in itself. 51 minutes of two people being, briefly and unexpectedly, real to each other in the way that strangers sometimes are when the circumstances arrange themselves correctly and nobody is performing anything for anyone. But in the months after her death, Robert found himself thinking about the story she had told him. The shoes, the 2 years, the train. He had thought about it occasionally before, in the way you think about the small things a person tells you at dinner. But after July 2026, he thought about it differently, with the specific retrospective quality of someone going back through the small moments of a life and finding, in each of them, the particular texture of the person who had lived it. She had missed the train by 40 seconds. She had sat down on the bench. She had said, "Are you going far?" That was who she was. In the smallest version and the largest version of herself, that was who she was. Someone who sat down on the bench. Someone who asked. There is a particular quality to the encounters that happen by accident that does not belong to the encounters that are planned. When you plan to meet someone, you bring with you the expectations and the roles and the specific architecture of a relationship that has been established in advance. When you sit down next to someone on a platform bench because the bench is there and the train is not, none of that exists. There is only the bench and the weight and whatever the two of you are, underneath all of it. Bonnie Tyler had spent 50 years being the planned encounter. The concert, the interview, the public appearance. Always expected, always prepared for, always the specific version of herself that the occasion required. She had been good at it. She was still very good at it. But the platform bench and the old man in the polished shoes and the 51 minutes had been something else. Had been, in a way she found difficult to articulate. The kind of conversation that reminded her of the reason conversation exists. Not to transact, not to manage an impression, but simply to be in contact with another person long enough to understand something about them and, in the understanding, something about yourself. She understood, sitting on the valley train going home, that Emrys had given her something. Not a story, not a piece of wisdom. Just the 40 seconds of lateness that had put her on the bench instead of the carriage. The specific ordinary luck of a missed train, which had given her 51 minutes of an 83-year-old man in polished shoes who had loved his wife for 58 years and was going to Cardiff to knock on his daughter's door without calling first. She hoped Sion would let him in. She still did not know whether she would. But she hoped it, specifically and completely, in the way you hope for things involving people you have briefly and entirely known.